So I am Valerie Paasch, and I am a pediatric psychologist who works a lot in that intersection between neurodevelopmental disabilities and health concerns, which is how I have found myself in our neurodevelopmental sleep clinic for the last 14 years. So I talk to families about sleep a whole lot. And we often talk about how sleep is survival and very important. So kind of starting off, just sort of what sleep should look like. We know that sleep looks different at different parts kind of the lifespan. When we're young, we tend to split our sleep time between daytime and nighttime. And the expectation is that we're still having daytime naps, at least until like the age of 5. At that point, we kind of switch and should be doing more of that like sleep consolidation at nighttime. And then the older we get, the less and less sleep that we need. And you guys can also kind of see here that we recognize everybody has a range of how much sleep they need. So there's the generally recommended amount in that kind of dark blue area. And then the sort of may also be appropriate sleep need in the teal color. And so the really tricky part is that this is based on chronological age. And in sleep with neurodevelopmental disorders, we often have a big conversation with families about how sometimes your child's sleep patterns may actually mirror their neurodevelopmental or their developmental age. And so in pediatrics, that's a big deal because it shifts how much your sleep may be fragmented and kind of shifts that daytime versus nighttime sleep. So kind of going through some common types of sleep problems, because y'all know providers love their jargon. So starting off, we have insomnia. And this is basically a fancy word for having persistent difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, getting enough sleep, getting quality sleep, all of the above, some of these things. And sort of in addition to that sleep disruption, also having an impact on your daytime functioning because of your poor sleep. Typically, interventions for insomnia include either behavioral sleep intervention or perhaps medication or melatonin. Our next type of sleep disorder is what we call circadian rhythm disorders. And this is basically like an umbrella term to kind of talk about when there is a mismatch between the child's kind of internal circadian rhythm or sleep clock and when society expects people to be sleeping. So we have some people with a delayed sleep phase where they are going to bed significantly later and waking significantly later than what we would expect for their age. We have advanced sleep phase, which is kind of the opposite, where you're going to bed really early at night and waking up really early in the morning. We have an irregular sleep-wake pattern, which is really common in autism and neurodevelopmental diagnoses, where basically there's just kind of no locked-in sleep schedule. Every night may be a little bit different. And then we also have a non-24-hour sleep-wake rhythm, where the person's sleep rhythm is typically a little bit longer than that typical kind of 24-hour regulation. So they end up basically cycling around the clock when they're sleeping without really being locked into a specific sleep schedule. And typically circadian rhythm disorders are treated with behavioral sleep interventions, melatonin or sleep medicine, and then some really strategic light exposure. We've also got sleep-related breathing disorders. And this is kind of another umbrella that captures lots of different things. Snoring, obstructive sleep apnea. So obstructive sleep apnea, or OSA, is when the person is having pauses in their breathing at night because something is blocking their airway and keeping them from consistently breathing. So then they wake up, often with a gasp or a startle, to start breathing again. We also have central sleep apnea, where basically the brain kind of forgets to tell the body to breathe. And so there end up being pauses in breathing. And then we have sleep-related hypoventilation disorders and sleep-related hypoxemia disorder, where there are sort of differences in oxygen and carbon dioxide exchanges at night, which can affect your sleep quality, but aren't necessarily kind of at the full level of those obstructions. And often, kind of depending on medical recommendations, these sleep-related breathing disorders may be treated with surgery, with CPAP or BiPAP to assist with kind of keeping the airway open at night, with nasal sprays, with dental intervention, with a pulse oximeter for monitoring at night, or in more extreme cases with oxygen supplementation. And then our last kind of group of sleep disorders I'll talk about is narcolepsy and hypersomnia. And these are disorders that are characterized by excessive sleepiness during the daytime. So for hypersomnia, this is the inability to stay awake and alert during the day when we're expected to do so, despite getting enough sleep at nighttime. And so this kind of means that no matter how hard you're trying, you cannot stay awake, you keep falling asleep. And then a type of hypersomnia is narcolepsy, where this is a neurological disorder that affects your body's sleep-wake cycles to where you're having a lot of that really deep sleep during the daytime instead of only having it at nighttime, which again kind of leads to difficulties staying awake despite trying. And narcolepsy and hypersomnia are typically treated with daytime medications to kind of help with alertness, nighttime medication if we need to improve that piece of sleep, and then sometimes doing some scheduled naps during the day to try to consolidate that breakthrough sleep. And there isn't a ton of research on sleep issues in our ASXL syndromes, but there is a little bit out there about kind of what to expect based on the diagnosis. So with ASXL1, we tend to see more narcolepsy, what they're calling sleep disturbance, which I know isn't very specific, irregular sleep-wake cycles, and sleep apnea. In ASXL type 2, we've got narcolepsy and sleep apnea that are the most common types of sleep disruptions. And then in ASXL 3, we've got sleep apnea, sleep disturbance, and bruxism, which is significant like teeth grinding. And so this is part of the reason why we're hoping to get a little bit more information about sleep as part of that ALP study, because sleep disturbance is really broad, and the specific type of sleep concern you have really can help kind of direct treatment and things to look out for and how to intervene. So why do these problems exist, in particular with kids with neurodevelopmental disorders? My really short answer is because they're complex and complicated. So most of the research that's out there is based specifically on autism spectrum disorder and sort of the different pieces that go into that sleep dysregulation for these kids. And as you can kind of see here, there's a bunch of stuff because sleep affects everything and everything affects sleep. And so we can have psychological and behavioral factors, less physical activity, co-occurring diagnoses, neurological differences, a dysregulated circadian rhythm, the sleep environment, social communication difficulties, or just our genes that can really impact what our sleep looks like. And since I only have 20 minutes, we're maybe going to talk about like the top 4, potentially most applicable to folks with ASXL. So we'll be focusing kind of on psychological and behavioral pieces, those co-occurring diagnoses, neurological differences, and then the circadian rhythm. So kind of starting out, every single one of us has this internal sleep clock or circadian rhythm that is kind of regulated partially by the light exposure we get during the day. And that includes sunlight, but it also includes light from our electronics because that is a similar wavelength to the sun. And another piece that's regulating it is our body's natural melatonin production. And this is important when we're talking about kids with neurodevelopmental differences, because a lot of them actually don't produce as much melatonin as their typically developing peers, that the conversion process in their bodies a little bit different. And so if we have somebody who's maybe not as physically active, not as kind of outside in the sunlight as much, and also not necessarily producing the same amounts of melatonin, that means that our sleep clock can get kind of out of whack. And for a lot of people, they're able to kind of use those environmental cues to kind of get back on track. But for kids who have social communication differences, that can be a little bit harder to kind of self-regulate and get the circadian rhythm kind of back on track again. The other reason the circadian clock is really important is because when we hit puberty, our internal sleep clock shifts about 2 hours later. So if we're thinking about kids with precocious puberty, potentially we're having that shift happen much earlier than we're kind of expecting. And we may start to have kids become night owls much earlier than we would expect. Another reason why sleep can be really hard for our kids with neurodevelopmental differences is just thinking about like that cycle of regulation. That regulation is a 24-hour cycle. Our daytime affects our nighttime affects our daytime. And so sometimes sleep disruption is actually more of a symptom of that bigger picture regulation, as opposed to being something kind of separate. So a lot of the time when we're thinking about regulation, we're having to kind of simultaneously address both the behavior pieces and the sleep pieces. Because if we're sleeping poorly at night, we're more dysregulated and kind of out of sorts during the day. If our daytime is rough, that means it's often harder to kind of calm down and go to sleep at nighttime. And we end up just kind of stuck in a cycle that can be really tricky. We've also got a whole lot of different like behavioral factors that can contribute. And just kind of behavior in general, tantrums, aggression, self-injury, refusals to go to bed, and especially when like parents are really tired at bedtime. It's extra hard to fight these battles then. If we've got kids with anxiety or mood concerns, sleep disruption's typically a definition or a component of that diagnosis. Same with ADHD, kind of contributing to more of that dysregulation. Our kids may have a hard time identifying like those environmental cues and realizing when it's getting dark outside, that means it's time to go to bed. Or more commonly, realizing it's 8 o'clock and the sun's still out. The sun is out in the daytime. It is not bedtime. I feel tired, but I will not go to bed because the sun is out. Kids who have difficulties with transition and sensory sensitivities, and there are a whole lot of sensory sensations that are involved in most bedtime routines, and that can be really tricky to kind of deal with. Looking at kind of sensory seeking behaviors, any challenges with like safety and behavior escalation, concerns about disrupting others, sleep deprived caregivers, the list just kind of goes on and on. And so we know that within ASXL, two of the big things that may contribute are those co-occurring diagnoses and neurological differences. And kind of looking at some of those pieces, there are a lot of neurological things which can really disrupt sleep. We've kind of mentioned the puberty piece, respiratory concerns. If you're not breathing well, it's harder to stay asleep. If you have vision issues that kind of affect your interpretation of light and dark, or some of those kind of more nuances in your environment, it's a little bit harder to regulate sleep. If you've got GI issues like reflux or constipation, that can lead to discomfort at nighttime because that's when our GI system actually does the most work. And then if we've got pain or spasticity, it can be uncomfortable to kind of be in bed and be trying to sleep. From the sleep apnea perspective, we know, again, neurological differences can contribute to central sleep apnea. And then there are a lot of other things related to low tone, differences in facial or jaw structure that can affect kind of the shape of the mouth, just making the airway smaller and making it easier to have obstructive sleep apnea. Similarly, being overweight, being obese, and just kind of having more weight around your jaw and your neck can also lead to obstructive sleep apnea because it's kind of putting pressure on your airway and closing it up a bit more. Hi. So I, like some of our presenters yesterday, am a borrower, and kind of looking at some of the awesome information that's on the AARE website, kind of looking by the different features at some of the systems that potentially are most impactful. And I think one thing you guys will see is that it's a whole lot of things, but sort of based on what we know about ASXL1, it could be those behavioral, emotional, visual, GI, cardiopulmonary, neurological, cognition, motor, or musculoskeletal things that are impacting sleep, meaning that the intervention may have to be kind of multifaceted to help your child. When we look at ASXL2, we know, again, we've got those behavior, emotional, visual, GI, cardiopulmonary, neurological, cognition, motor, and musculoskeletal variables that may be impacting your child's ability to sleep. And then for ASXL3, we've got kind of those core pieces again, but a couple of extra ones with poor temperature regulation, which can make it hard to kind of regulate the circadian rhythm. And then also precocious puberty, which can cause that circadian shift a little bit earlier. So how do we help your child? Sometimes it's starting with kind of the medical mood behavior pieces. Sometimes it's starting with sleep. Sometimes it's doing both at the same time. And so if we're starting with some of the sleep pieces, one of the things doctors will often talk about is polysomnography, a PSG, or easiest name, an overnight sleep study. And you can kind of see all the equipment here, that the primary thing that it's assessing is breathing concerns. And it'll also be looking at limb movements and other odd behaviors while your child's sleeping to figure out if potentially there is a medical piece that's affecting sleep. And this is how you diagnose obstructive sleep apnea or central sleep apnea. There are additional pieces. You may have an overnight EEG looking for seizures. You may have blood work looking for some things that could potentially be treated or supplemented to help with sleep. Some providers will have you do a sleep log. You can see a picture here where either you're writing down times in bed and out of bed, or they'll have you kind of color things in to get a visual representation. Or they may talk about actigraphy, which is a wearable device that your child would wear 24 hours a day, kind of tracking movement and using that to get information about sleep. And since sleep is so multifaceted, it means there may be a whole lot of different professionals helping, or a whole lot of different people that you could talk to kind of figure out how to help your child sleep the most. And as you guys know, specialists all kind of stay in their lane. So thinking about talking with an ENT about large tonsils or adenoids, concern for a sleep study. Your neurologist, you may be talking to them about seizures interfering with sleep, sleep medication, tone or spasticity. You may be talking to a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a behavioral therapist if you think that that behavior mood piece or that kind of bigger picture dysregulation is one of the biggest contributors to sleep disruption. Pulmonologist, you talk to about kind of these different types of sleep apnea or breathing concerns. And then there are also sleep specialists that may kind of double dip and fill some of these other roles, but they would be the ones doing that really deep dive into all of the pieces about sleep. And some kind of less common folks, maybe talking to your endocrinologist if there are concerns for precocious puberty, your GI specialist about reflux, pain or PM&R if you're concerned with pain management or some of that tone spasticity. And sometimes talking with your physical therapist about like positioning devices and things to kind of help your child be more comfortable when they're sleeping. So you can kind of see lots of different resources out there to hopefully help with this. Great. So thank you guys. I'm going to pass it to our next person, one of our parent experts.
So Bob Walsh is joining us online, and he is the parent of a ASXL3 child. So.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm sorry I can't be there. I very much want to be there in person. I unfortunately had a very untimely case of COVID. And while I am very happy to share our life experiences, I didn't think anybody wanted me to share that. So here I am. Our daughter Amelia is 11 years old. This is some pictures of her sleeping as a baby. And the bottom right, the more current one. You can go to the next slide. So yeah, like I said, she's 11. I just want to tell you a little bit about her. I think every one of our kids is very similar in many ways, but they're all affected so differently. So this is a little bit about her. She was born in Oklahoma City, where my wife is from. We moved to Massachusetts when she was a baby. We lived there for a few years, and we have been living in Minnesota since 2017. She was diagnosed with ASXL3 Bainbridge-Roper syndrome in 2017. At 4.5 years old, that's when we lived in Massachusetts, and it was through a research grant through Boston Children's Hospital. She originally was just diagnosed with a global developmental delay. Later, we got an autism diagnosis, and she has a cortical visual impairment. Those were all before she got the BRS diagnosis. She was delayed in most things. Crawled at 2. She walked at 5.5 years old. And just some of the different things she's gone through. She's had MRIs. She's had 2 separate sleep studies where they were mostly looking for seizure activity, did EEGs, but she did have a diagnosis of central sleep apnea. However, her oxygen levels never went to a level which was concerning, so we didn't have to do any interventions there. She's had different surgeries, adenoid tonsils removed, teeth, endoscopies, and a year ago, she had a very major orthopedic surgery where they reconstructed her legs. So she's had her share of issues. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So as a toddler, she would go to sleep very early, and she would sleep super late till 11 a.m., which anybody who has a toddler knows that's not normal. She's the oldest of 3 girls, so they get up pretty early at that age, and she would sleep. So we started wondering what was going on. We kind of realized that she wasn't sleeping for a large portion of the night. She would just kind of lay there awake, but she wasn't sleeping. We started her on melatonin, which helped through therapies. They suggested we get her a weighted blanket. That helped. And also what kind of helped early on was she started preschool at 3. And for a toddler who, they're typically running around, exploring everything, and her mobility wasn't great, so she probably was not getting much energy out. So that helped for a while. However, like a lot of things, once we think we have something figured out, new problems arise. So that didn't, then she started having sleep issues again. We had her put on cyproheptadine, which was mostly for cyclical vomiting, but it also had the added benefit of drowsiness at bedtime. So that was effective for a while. So she's very routine based, and while she get her energy out at school and therapies, physical therapy, PTOT, speech, when she had breaks, summer breaks, weekends, any kind of change in routine, she'd have additional sleep issues. So that was always a challenge. We kept her in a crib until she was 6. And there was a few nights when she tried to get out of bed, and one time she jumped over a railing, and that was the end of that. So we put her in a regular bed. So all of her sleeping, we've had a pretty good routine, and it all works until it doesn't. And any kind of issue that arises, whether she's sick, she's upset about something, she has some kind of pain we're not sure about, that all affects her sleep. So it all kind of bleeds into one where it's behavioral, GI, all of her typical issues. She just wants to escape. And when she's upset about something, she can't process it right, and she just wants to leave the room. So she does not want to be in bed. She doesn't want to sleep. And we end up throwing the medicine cabinet at her, and she still wants to get out. So often I'll end up staying just outside of her room or putting her back in bed until she finally gives up and just passes out. So that's kind of the emergency situations when she just will not go to sleep. So we can go to the next slide. So as happy as we were when she started walking, that also provided some more issues because she's now mobile, but also nonverbal. So she is not going to come get us when she tries to get out of bed. Her sisters will come and wake us up. She will just get up and leave and go about the house. We had motion alert cameras in her room. Those weren't always effective. Sometimes they would not go off when she got out of bed, or we wouldn't wake up when the beep would go off on our phone. She escaped a few times. One time she got out of her room, walked around the house. We realized she was up since 1 a.m. to exploring the house by herself for 6 hours, which is a problem because she has pica, which means she will eat items that are not edible. She'd find things that, put in her mouth. So that happened twice, and we eventually turned the doorknobs around and we lock her in a room, which I did not want to do. I felt like it was a jail, but that was what we had to do to keep her safe. Fortunately, we make her room Amelia proof. So if she gets up and wanders around her room, there's nothing in there that can really hurt her as long as we keep the door to her bathroom and outside locked. Yeah, because she can't tell us if something's wrong, and she won't come and get us. So that's what we do. I know they have products where you can kind of enclose them in their bed. We haven't really felt like we needed to do that. So that's kind of our solution now. We have a good routine to get her to bed 90% of the time. We have to help her with all her ADLs. We bathe her, brush her teeth, get her ready for bed. We make sure her room is dark. We have our weighted blankets. We have a sound machine and a fan for, white static noise. We have a diffuser that gives a smelly mist of lavender in her room to help relax. We try not to do anything super exciting before bed so she can calm down. So currently she is on melatonin. She's still on the cyproheptadine, which we've varied the dosing as she's aged, and she is on trazodone. Same situation. Those 3 meds are what gets her to bed most of the time, gets her tired, and she will stay asleep most of the time. We have some rescue meds that we've kind of talked to and trial and error through her psychiatrist and sleep specialist for the really bad nights to try to help her get to sleep. We'll give her clonidine. Sometimes we'll give her Ativan. If she does have a clonidine patch with slow release, those will help a lot of the time, although there are still nights when nothing helps. We've tried CBD oil under sublingual. That thought maybe it helped for a little while, but I don't actually think it did much, so we stopped that. And we will sometimes try massages with smelling oil, and that will help sometimes. All right, next slide. So just ongoing different sleep issues we've considered. I mean, being nonverbal and communication being an issue. There's been times when she was just really thirsty and we didn't think to get her a drink of water. There's been times when she probably just had to go to the bathroom and couldn't tell us. Maybe sometimes she's, hey, I'm not tired yet. Is there something else bothering her? Is she having GI pain? We just started, she just started puberty. So that's additional challenges. Also, there's an issue of travel. She doesn't not want anybody in a room with her when she's trying to sleep. She will scream, she will point you out the door, get out, I'm trying to sleep. I think it just added input to her brain. She doesn't want somebody there. She wants to just chill out and focus on trying to sleep, but you can't travel. You need an additional hotel room for that because you have to be in there with her. So that's an issue. And we also, we don't want to always have to medicate her. We don't want all these medications. We're always trying to figure out how to limit the amount of medications, but especially, you know, it's hard to function as an adult when we don't have sleep. But for these kids who have so many issues and everything's that much harder for them, the lack of sleep, we really think sleep is important. So we really try to focus on her getting a good night's sleep as often as possible. So next slide, please. And just things we're concerned about in the future. How do we keep caring for her as an adult? If my wife and I ever want to travel, how do we get the person to watch her on the cameras and pay attention to her as much as we do? I mean, my wife and I took a vacation. I was texting my father, who was here helping from Hawaii. I'm like, hey, she's awake. Can you go get her? And just if she's ever moving to a group home and just, you know, ongoing things are always changing as she gets older. So I think that's it. Thank you for listening.
Huge thank you to Bob. And we're going to hear from Matina Trussell, an ASXL2 parent.
Hi, everybody. I'm Matina Trussell. This is my son right in front of me, Will Trussell, and he has ASXL2 Shashi Pinna. So let's see if I can operate this. All right. Okay, so he was born and he is 9 years old. And if you're wondering how long we've been having sleep issues, that's been since day one of life. I gave birth to him around 6 o'clock in the morning. And by midnight that night, they were pulling me out of my hospital room to go down to NICU to calm him down. You shouldn't have to do that with a newborn, but it literally started day one. So these are some pictures of him over the years. This was him in his crib. You can see he is on a mask. He's on a machine to help him breathe. We were talking about the apneas earlier. These are some of the sleep situations, sleep studies that he's been through. We tried it all, and I mean all. These are just some of the things, and it goes on and on from there. But just as Bob was saying, we've tried so many different things, including the weighted blankets like Bob was talking about, the comfortable bedding, the total darkness versus some light in the room, lamps, night lights, the music, the scent, all the things that I'm sure that all of you have tried with the sleep disturbances, lots and lots of things. We even got to a point a couple of years ago where we ended up building his own room off another side of the house because he cannot have anybody near him. He just can't have any sound. We have 2 other children at home that are younger than him, and we just could not have that near him. So he's got a king size bed in his room because he's got to be able to spread out and just have his space. He's got the safety things like the bed rail. It's soundproof insulated walls. He's got a solid door. He's got rugs. He's got everything he needs in there. Like Bob said too, for safety. We have tried these things too. We've tried trying to wear him out in the middle of the night with playtime. We've tried the vibrating shaky vest that he has generally for the pulmonary respiratory issues. We've tried that. We've tried holding and rocking him, singing, playing him songs that he likes, driving him around in a vehicle. I've heard that helps newborns or toddlers. We've tried it. Lamps. We've done probably close to 10 sleep studies. We have finally determined he has 2 kinds of apneas. He has central apnea and severe obstructive apnea. He has been on a BiPAP machine. He's now on an ASV, which controls both apneas at the rates that he needs. He has had a nasal mask, but he's an open mouth breather, so he has a full face mask. The trouble has been finding the right pressures, so that took time. That's definitely caused some sleep disturbances right there. We have been in constant communication with doctors and medical supply companies, and we've regularly communicated with his team. He has a complex care team back. We live in Atlanta, so we're big up in the children's healthcare system of Atlanta, where he has that medical complex team. Hospital admissions are one of the worst things. And like Bob said, traveling is another one of the worst for sleep disturbances. For hospital admissions, we request what's called cluster care. So we want to have as few disturbances in the middle of the night as possible, like with the techs that come in, nurses that come in, vitals that have to be done. So we try to cluster that as much as possible. We speak up for Will. We advocate as much as possible for his needs so that he doesn't have these behavioral issues that can come into play. We bring items from home that are comfortable. Like in this picture, you see he's got a little musical seahorse that he likes, his blanket. We have to have all those things. We also bring his personal apnea machine, so he's not stuck on the hospital ventilator with those high pressures. And we definitely have a plan just in case. So Bob also mentioned there's medications. There's definitely medications for sleep. In this picture, and I didn't mention like specific types of medications, but you can see in this picture, this is the quantity of medications that were used specifically for sleep and nothing else. It's just for sleep that we started to try over the years. And then we came to a point where he was taking this many pills just for sleep. That's a lot. And now we're down to 4.5 pills, and that 1 bottle is our rescue med. So we've made it to, I want to find some wood to knock on. We've made it to a good point right now. But it did take a lot of time, several years to get to this point. So currently we do have our solid nightly routine. We have that calm down time. We have the bath. We have the medicine given. We give our meds about 30 minutes prior to sleep time. We make sure that he recognizes that when lights are turned down, that is signifying this is bedtime. We slowly walk him around. And then we finally take him back to his bedroom. So we don't do anything in his bedroom until it's time to go to bed. And then once in his bedroom, we have all of these things that we do. We have a lamp on. He has a few movies, I think 3, like Moana, Encanto, Coco. Those are like his movies of choice that I have seen so many times that I know by heart. And we just let him play, and he will drift off. There's also a rain sound machine playing in the background. We go through the whole routine of his clothes, like he knows what comes off first, what comes on next. He knows what's to come. We position him. When I say we, he's a big kid. And he's only 9 years old. So it takes my husband and I both to position him up where he needs to be. And then he has an adjustable bed where he can be inclined and such. He has his favorite nighttime toy. It's still that seahorse that has the glow in the dark, has that little light in the song. We rub his head. We make sure we observe his sleepy time level. And then we finally, once he drifts off, put on his mask. And then I'm trying to get out of his room around 10 o'clock at night. Sometimes he falls asleep a little bit before or after 10. And that so far has been our routine. And then just to kind of summarize, I don't say I'm an expert in sleep, but I'm an expert in Will, in our son and his sleep. So for us, for getting the best sleep we can for Will is to find the right machine. So he has, like I said, the apneas, he has the central and the severe obstructive apnea. We have had surgeries like Bob was saying too. We've had the tonsils and that noise removed. He was born with a small recessed chin, retrognathia. He's had his jaw moved so he can have a bigger airway as well. He has had the Flonase, all the things. So it came down to the right machine, BiPAP versus ASV, the right pressures. So that's what he's on right now. The right specialists, and you had just mentioned all of this in your speech too. We have neurology, sleep, pulmonology, ENT, and behavioral psychiatry. All of these specialists we talk to about his sleep. We are in constant communication about that. And then the third way to find his best sleep is to have the right medications. And you saw pictures of those, and it took a while to find those right medications. So that is it for me. Thank y'all.
Okay, we have about 15 minutes for some questions. I'll check the. So does everybody have on the back of your thing, if you haven't already done it, there's the Slido, information on the Slido app. You can go on there to ask questions so that we can get people from, but mine kicked me out. So in the meantime, is there somebody who has a question here?
I got you, Julie. It's up on the screen there.
Okay.
I'll ask it for you.
Okay.
So can you speak a bit more about how visual impairment might contribute to sleep disturbances?
Sure. So sometimes it is related to the way that your light or that your eyes are processing kind of lightness and darkness. Since light is one of the biggest cues for circadian rhythms, if you're kind of processing those things differently and not necessarily getting that contrast between light and dark, it can make it more hard for your body to produce melatonin. Similarly, if you have kind of just other types of visual impairments, you're maybe not necessarily picking up on the level of details in your environment and some of those just kind of more naturalistic cues that could be kind of triggering or kind of alerting you that it's time to go to sleep or it's time to wake up. And then I guess kind of the third way is if you then have other sensory sensitivities because of visual differences, then sometimes that can make your other senses a bit more heightened and just make it harder to relax and to sleep at nighttime.
Thank you. The next one is if your child has broken sleep, will they need more overall sleep?
It depends. I think genuinely it depends. We have some kids who can get by on like 3 hours of sleep in whatever capacity. Their parents and their siblings cannot. And we have some other kids who then will make up for any disrupted nighttime sleep during the day. So that's where it's kind of figuring out how much that disrupted sleep seems to be affecting daytime behavior, ability to pay attention, ability to kind of calm and regulate. And then it's kind of problem solving with your team to figure out how we tweak those kind of sleep recommendations on paper to fit your family's needs and your child's sleep needs the best possible.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions about CBD or medical marijuana, which I know Bob talked about a little bit. He said he didn't feel like it helped him, but Matina, have you tried that and has it worked for you?
We have not tried that yet.
Okay.
Not tried it.
Okay. So the next one would be about multiple children. If you have multiple children, how do they help or harm the process going to bed? Do they read books to your other child? Does that excite them or help? What experience have you had there?
Okay, Will is 9 and we have an 8-year-old. My daughter's with us also, and we have a 6-year-old. So they have endured Will's sleep or lack thereof all of their life. When they were born, they were in a crib in our bedroom, like you're supposed to do, and Will was sleeping in our bedroom with us or not sleeping. Luckily, we were blessed. It was like the Lord knew that we needed children who could sleep through this. And so they've been good about it. They've been able to stay asleep, and we've tried to keep them apart since they could leave our room. We've tried to keep them just doors shut away. We've had to transition him onto the living room in the middle of the night just to, keep him active while they're sleeping.
Thank you.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Bob.
From the clouds. Sorry. I can answer the CBD thing a little bit.
Oh, thank you.
So we did try CBD for a while. There were times where I thought it might have helped, but over like the course of like a year or so, I would say that I did not see a difference, particularly when we were trying to use it like as a rescue situation. It just didn't have much of an effect. No, from what I understood of it, her trazodone helps her fall asleep. The CBD would help her stay asleep. So we never, and I think the main issue for her was going to sleep. And we have not tried medical marijuana. Our palliative care doc has suggested that as a potential option. But like, again, it's not the fact that she's not tired or she's not sleepy. It's that her brain will not let her go to sleep. She's like wired and she just cannot calm down. Her eyes will be half masked. She's like looking, so drowsy, so sleepy. So I don't know that it would help much in like those really hard scenarios. Maybe on a, day-to-day basis it'd be helpful, but I think we had a good regimen where we haven't needed to go into that. As far as the sibling thing, Amelia's 11, her sisters are 9 and 7 now, so they're a little older. They're not jumping all over the bed, keeping her awake, making her excited. Now they'll actually sit and read to her what she really likes. So that'll be a common activity. So they're helpful in that. And she really likes having them there most of the time. So now that they're older, it's helpful. But I think probably when they were young, it was not. We try to just pick them out of the room.
Thank you. And Bob, feel free to jump in whenever here, because I don't always see you. Okay, so what the next question would be, do you see fluctuations in sleep relating to hormonal changes?
Yes. So part of it is that 2-hour delay in the sleep schedule, but then part of it is like growth and kind of pains that come with growing pains, things related to kind of moods that are a bit more variable. So I think we see it at lots of different levels, sometimes in shifting sleep and then sometimes just disrupting it because of that general dysregulation or because of pain.
And this one could be for anyone really, but how do you get an accurate result from a sleep study if the child's not following their normal sleep routine or has been done in a clinic study? I call them not sleep studies. Anybody have any? So for the parents, do you have any ways that you can use in the clinic to help them to actually sleep? Or
we have to bring all the things, all the rescue medicines, And unfortunately, most sleep studies will say you have to be out by 5 o'clock in the morning or some obscenely early time in the morning. And that's sometimes when he falls asleep is like 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, especially during those sleep studies. So it's hard, it's very hard, but then they can see how frustrated I am. And, most of the time they'll let him sleep a couple hours so they can get anything that they need to determine, what he needs.
Yeah, and sometimes you can work with your lab. If they also do narcolepsy testing, those are the daytime sleep studies. If you have a child whose sleep schedule is really shifted, sometimes you can collaborate with the physician ordering the study to change the time of when they want the monitoring to happen. Because like you said, a lot of our kids fall asleep in those early morning hours, and they're just getting to sleep when the study would end. And then absolutely bringing everything, like advocating for anything that will help your child be comfortable, be sleep, be calm. Our families are often coming in with wagons full of stuff, and we love it because we want our kids to be as comfortable as possible.
Thank you. Bob, did you have any?
We only did 2 sleep studies. We didn't do as many as some of you probably, and I was convinced she wouldn't sleep, but for some reason we got really lucky and she slept through both. So I don't really have a good thing, but yeah, we brought her iPad, we brought toys, and especially with all the stuff wrapped around her head and the electrodes, I was convinced she would not sleep. I don't know how we get so lucky, but I don't have good advice for that of it.
How about, do you guys, I know we talked a lot about tips and hacks about sleeping away, like including hospitalizations, but do you have anything, anything else that helps when you're away from home that can help them?
We try to only go to families' houses who have a separate room for her. I know that we travel. My wife is from Oklahoma. I'm from Massachusetts, so we're often traveling different places during holidays. And usually you have cousins sleeping in the same room with each other or whatever, but Amelia always gets her own room. We bring sound machines. We make sure there's like sheets if they don't have blackout curtains, keeping the room dark. And we try to travel with like a Blink Amazon camera or whatever that goes to our phone to make sure she's safe. But they're just trying the best keep a routine for her. I mean, travel, she's a routine-based kid, as a lot of ours are. And travel always is, by definition, disrupting a routine. So we just try to get her to bed at a fairly normal time and just try to keep some semblance of a routine.
Okay. Do you have any other thoughts?
We try to get when we stay overnight somewhere that's comparable to a house or a condo type situation. Hotels are the hardest because I think it's because it makes him feel like he's in the hospital because he's confined to a bedroom. So I think he's a little scared that way. And plus, like Bob said, whenever we do have to go to a hotel, it's like a 2-room situation for sure. It's just Will and I in one room and my husband and the other kids in the other. So as close to a house as possible. And that also helps when we have to do a transition or a reset in the night where we have to get him out of the room and then wheel him around the living room or the kitchen. That's helpful too, the setting.
Great. So has anyone tried the pharmacogenetic testing? And could this be included in future research? I don't know if that's something you can answer.
I was going to say, this is where I'm glad I'm a psychologist because this is out of my wheelhouse.
All right. Okay. Let's see. Have you found anything that helps you ensure your own restorative sleep, scheduling, medication? So for parents, is there anything that's helped you with your sleep?
We sleep in shifts. So my husband and I will sleep in shifts a lot. We take turns who's going to deal with Will and who can go to sleep. It eventually came down to I had to change jobs because I can no longer work. I work from home now. So that's been incredibly helpful. But I know not everybody can do that, but sleeping in shifts has been what's worked for us.
Great. Bob, do you have any thoughts?
So I am a stay-at-home dad. My wife is a pretty busy physician, so the sleep issues usually fall on me because she can't, be in surgery half asleep. So, fortunately, these issues, when she has the real sleep issues, don't last for more than a few days to like a week. So I'm still able to manage to get by, on my own. So, yeah, I'm the guy who handles sleep issues. So.
Gotcha. So it looks like, are there any other questions? We do have a recommendation here that I'll just share. It's there's a safety sleep bed for those people who, I think Bob talked about it a little bit, but you can zip it up and then they're safe in their bed and you don't have to worry about them as much. I have a question actually. So we deal with my daughter, I guess, and maybe it would be for you because your kids aren't nonverbal, but my daughter is nonverbal. And sometimes, and if she doesn't get enough sleep, we have seizures. And she does not always wake me up. And so I have monitors and different things, and I try to keep track of her. But is there another way to keep track of? Because sometimes she'll get herself into a random weird position. And if I had known, I could have fixed it and she could have gone back to sleep. But I'll wake up and it was hours before I realized that that was going on. So is there any way that you know of that we could help with that?
So I think what we hear from our families the most is using like the motion censored video systems or things where then in the parents' room, there's an audio alert or something if the camera has started recording, if it seems that there's movement that's happening. And then a lot of it is just problem solving, kind of how to position the bed and how to kind of maximize the chances that she won't get stuck kind of in a position. And that's where sometimes working with a PT or a PM&R physician can be helpful to figure out what adaptations are available, what things might an insurance company cover. Just kind of from that broader safety standpoint, especially when we're working with kids with lower tone and kids that may have a harder time repositioning themselves after something like that has occurred. So genuinely with sleep, sometimes it's taking that step back and kind of saying, I know we're talking about sleep, but who are maybe some of the other specialists that could kind of help with this?
Thank you. It looks like we have one more question that kind of has the same question, same general idea as mine, which is that they do get into a wrong position and parents don't realize, is there something? So you were saying talk to a PT, is that what, and they might be able to help you not have that happen?
Yeah, to kind of from that like antecedent or before standpoint, think about positioning and then potentially if there are certain times of night that it's happening, just planning to do like a check-in at that time to reposition.
Thank you. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. We have lunch coming in. So let's give one more round of applause to our